Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the sales webinar series that we have here at the Center for Professional Selling at Ball State University. I'm your host, Deva Rangarajan, and today, in continuation with my talk with people across the pond, I also have Mr. Sebastian Dahl, who is a freelance HR consultant, but who has lots of years of experience in senior HR, human resource positions, helping the sales organizations in these organizations go through tough times. So Sebastian, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me and the audience.
Thank you so much, Deva. Great talking to you again, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Indeed. Sebastian, I must say that you're the first HR person that I am talking to for my webinar series. So essentially what I'm trying to say is that it's not that when I've done my training sessions, we've not dealt with HR and learning and development and that kind of stuff. But you're the first person that I'm talking to in HR, and I've been doing this for 2 years. And I think it just goes to show that there are so many different departments in an organization that plays such a critical role for sales to be successful that I'm kicking myself for not actually having talked to a senior HR professional from that viewpoint. So I'm going to remedy that situation. So I'm going to talk to you about this. So Sebastian, just from your perspective, what is happening in the business world out there that an HR professional says, wait a minute, it's time for us to be looking at changing the way we do business with our sales organization? That is, what is the need for sales transformation, as you put it, from an HR perspective?
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting question. And when you contemplate what has changed significantly in sales over the last, say, 10, 15 years, I think we've seen some significant shifts in the circumstances under which sales operate. So from a macro perspective, obviously, we've seen the consolidation. I think a lot of consolidation across many industries. We've seen the globalization also kicking in, making it much more transparent, and markets that were traditionally quite isolated, or even industries or customer segments that were quite isolated, have become much more transparent. So it's become significantly easier for potential customers and existing customers to go out and hunt for whatever knowledge and benchmarks and data that they need, which has, I think, significantly also changed the role of sales towards customers and markets. And simultaneously, I think many industries, whether it's B2C, B2G, B2C, B2B, also see much larger demands from customers. So the customer demands have increased significantly, and our customers want more, and they want more from less to some extent also. And the last thing I want to mention is also when you look at professional sourcing and procurement teams, they've gone through a radical change and have become much more sophisticated in their approach towards potential suppliers and how they push and drive the market also. So I think that's some of the key reasons for the sales transformation challenge that I think we see in many industries and many businesses.
Sebastian, it's very interesting. I want to pick on two things. One is, it's interesting that when I talk to sales leaders, they talk about some of the things that you mentioned. My point is that why does a HR professional like you get interested in what problems the sales organization is facing? I know that this is a loaded question, because it's amazing that I'm talking to an HR professional and you're talking the lingo of sales leaders. You're talking about what salesmen should be talking. So tell me, is there also a move from HR to also start saying, you know what, we are no longer just going to be a generalist function, that we are actually even going to have the equivalent of your boots on the ground or together the sales organization? To what extent do you see that happening more and more, or is that a must moving forward?
Well, firstly, I think it is a must moving forward. But and I also think that within HR communities, it's something that we've been talking about for quite some years, that we want to become true business partners. And I think this is the truth for many support functions, that you want to become truly value adding in your approach to how you support, especially whether it's sales or operations. And in order to do that, you need to grasp the value attributes that a particular business brings to the market and brings to the customer. And my belief, and I think the belief of many HR professionals out there, is that sales is the most important function in any business. Right? I think for years we've almost neglected to think about sales as a truly strategic function. Yeah. And sales has been sort of a bit of an appendix on a growing marketing organization. Yeah. And we need to rethink that. We need to rethink the way that we perceive sales in particular. And I think sales and commercial functions overall have become much more of a science than they were just 5 or 10 years ago.
I love this. I love the fact that we actually have senior HR professionals actually taking an interest in sales, because that has always been the issue. We've talked about it because we've been teaching sales to younger students, and there's this feeling that sales is not something for people who are well qualified and educated. But I guess with the amount of interest, saying that you even have HR business partners looking into sales, just goes to show that there can be a good career path for those people interested in a career in sales, or the fact that even internally you might want to move across departments. I think it's fantastic that you have this. I want to pick your brain on one more thing, which I think is great that you mentioned it, right? Because I think that's where the HR function has a very broad kind of a view on how they can help the whole organization, because every function within an organization needs to staff its people, correct? And which means that they have to work with HR. So in a kind of feel, it is very strange that talking to you has only made me realize, because it's one of those things where you think in your silos, but what talking to you and hearing you say, especially when you talked about procurement, which I thought was brilliant, is when I talk to a lot of sales managers, they don't necessarily think about procurement, probably because in their head, okay, we have to deal with them. But when you say specifically as one of the mega trends is that the procurement organization is becoming more professional, to what extent does HR also play a role in the professionalization of the procurement function? Because what you're actually doing is that you are not only looking at sales within your organization, you're also helping the procurement organization professional. So which means that you actually have a better bird's eye view of cutting edge practices about how procurement is going. So tell me your thoughts on that one. So how do you guys in HR business partners share ideas so that what you learn from staffing procurement can be used to train or prepare the HR, the salespeople to understand what's happening there? Am I making sense in my question?
Well, let me have a stab at it at least.
I
think it's a really interesting perspective, and I think what a procurement, the way that you in a business manage your procurement and manage your professional sourcing across categories, indirect, direct, etc., is to some extent a bit of a mirror that you need to hold up in front of you and say, well, if these are the questions and the demands that we put on our suppliers, then chances are that this is exactly the same reality that our sales organizations are facing. And I think with the risk of shooting a little bit in an opposite direction here, Deva, I think what we have in sales been really, really good at for many, many years, in particularly across many different sales branches and sales channels, has been building customer relations. Right? We've been extremely good at building relationships to our customers, in particular the few key people that are in a buying center. And as you've I think also mentioned in some of your interviews, the size of the buying centers are growing significantly, right? I think on average there is now 6.8 or so people in a buying center. And I think we within a sales organization and a business overall need to become or need to go away from being solely focused on building customer relations and becoming much more strategic in the way that we build not only relations with a customer across organizational levels, across many silos, but we also need to be much more scientific in the way we approach sales, using data, being better at talking about the value add that we bring to a customer, instead of talking about the traditional parameters, price, quality, delivery service, etc.
I think this is a brilliant answer, because I think what I really what I'm taking away from this is the fact that procurement does not work with assumptions anymore, right? Procurement works with better preparation, more scientific. Yes. And essentially the takeaway from this is, from an HR perspective, if you are touching both departments, you can actually take a look at how procurement is becoming more professional. And as you said, it's like a mirror. So why don't we get our salespeople to do the same things that our procurement is doing it to your suppliers, thereby. Yes. But for me, Sebastian, tell me, why is it that every time I talk to a company, I say, when you want to do practice role plays to coach your salespeople, get your own procurement team and practice with them. And why is it that it does not happen? Why is it that an outsider like me can make such an obvious statement?
Yeah.
And an organization with professionals who are very, very smart cannot make that connection of saying, wait a minute, our procurement is dealing with complex buying situations. Our salespeople are dealing with it, except that why don't we get our salespeople to practice with us? So essentially, why does that not happen?
Well, I don't think there's a straightforward, simple answer to that question, but I think that the harsh reality, I think, especially across many types of bigger businesses, is that our ability to utilize the resources and the capabilities that we have within, and building strong networks that help each other out across silos, is, I think, something that we still struggle with. Even though that we have now much better tools, and I think also appreciation about the fact that we need to work together in order for us to succeed as a business. But I think you're absolutely right. I think that there is, I think maybe it's a bit of a mindset that also we need to understand across functions, that we're all sales people. You know, whether we're facing the customer directly or indirectly, we are all here to serve the customers. Right? There's a famous Henry Ford quote that says that company owners they don't pay wages, the customers pay wages, right? Company owners only manage the money and manage the pay slips.
Indeed, right? And for me, this is very, very, very heartening. I think, Sebastian, from my experience, that you are one of those cutting edge HR professionals who take and speak the language of sales, because if we expect our salespeople to talk the language of their customers, you are talking the language of your internal customers, which I think is fantastic in terms of how you're talking. They're saying things like 6.8, even following or at least looking at some of the blogs where we have talked to salespeople. From an HR perspective, I think it's phenomenal that you want to be on the cutting edge of what is happening in terms of sales. Let me begin. Let me ask the next question. So you talked about there's a need for transformation, right? How has the digital aspect, so you talked about trends in factors that your customers are more prepared, there's going to be more consolidation, and procurement is becoming more. And of course, one of the key things that is making a lot of this possible is technology, right? So technology that is driving forth how procurement is becoming more professional, how customers are becoming more knowledgeable, and how is technology shaping the sales function consequently from an HR perspective?
Well, I think obviously in this unprecedented time that we currently find ourselves in, the digitalization and IT has become something much more than just a random appendix. It's become absolutely vital, I think, across many industries in their attempt to cater to the needs of the market and reassess the reality. I think first and foremost, the sales organizations have been going through, or sales function has been going through some significant shifts in terms of the tools and the analytics that they apply in their everyday work. And I think the IT skills of any salesperson, whether you're a sales executive or you're a sales rep, is much more demanding, or the demands are much higher compared to what they traditionally were. And I think when we look into the crystal ball in terms of some of the capabilities that we need going forward, we need people that are much stronger at manipulating data, working with analytics. But we also need people that have a curiosity and a much more holistic view on their customers and a desire to truly understand their full supply cycle and how you, from a sales perspective, can help drive this. Now, the tools, the IT tools or new digital tools give you some of those opportunities. But I think, like in many other functions, sometimes new IT tools and new digital ways of working can also become a bit of a hindrance.
Yeah.
So you need to be very straight on what is the purpose of whatever tool you want to implement, whether it's a new IT tool, a segmentation tool, new account plans, new performance metrics. What is the purpose of what it is you do? And how does this benefit, at the very end, how does this benefit the customer, but also how does this help sales become better? So I think we are facing a completely revised way of thinking about capabilities in sales and what we need for the future.
Indeed.
You had a really interesting interview some time ago with CSO Insights. I believe Celeste Lunsford was the name. And one of the discussions or one of the topics you talked about was this sales talent survey.
Indeed.
That CSO Insights had done recently, which was, I think, very, very interesting. And one of the things that came out of that conversation was that 84%, I believe it was, of sales executives don't think that they have the capabilities needed to cater to the needs of the customers in the future.
Yeah.
Right? Now, that is staggering.
Yes, indeed. It's for me, you're absolutely right. And I think for me, this is great to hear from your perspective, some of the things that we talk about. And it's very heartening to see that sales managers are not alone in this, right? Because at the end of the day is that the tendency, the sales managers already have so much demands placed on them that they cannot sometimes go back and take a look at how do I then translate this into workplace practices, and development skill sets needed, and they need a partner inside. And having HR being so driven from the perspective of sales managers, not just a general HR. I think it's phenomenal that you talk about this. Now, I just want to touch on the technology, and you talked about these kind of things, not having the skill set, right? So if 84%, if 84% of sales leaders think that they don't have access to the right talent and pipeline, my question, of course, is two things. How ready are the sales executives themselves for the challenges of the future? Because it's easy to say that I don't have access to the talent, but the question is, do they have the skill set themselves to recognize that they have to change themselves? That's one question that I have. And linked to that is a question that is key to every organization that is looking at going through this kind of change. What happens to fear, anxiety, that starts coming into, again, even executives are also prone to this. So essentially, if you could help me answer those two questions. First is, how, in your opinion, and you can be honest, so this is not a reflection on where you worked with before, but what you hear from your cohort of fellow HR professionals, that 84% number, to what extent can we safely say that the same 84% of managers who said that they don't have access to the right kind of talent are ready themselves for these changes?
Well, I think you touched upon something vital. And I think and this doesn't just go for sales, right? I think many types of functions, you will see that there is a somewhat, at times, hazy feeling that we don't have what we need because we're either not moving quickly enough, we're not efficient enough, we're not proactive enough. And certainly in my experience, what starts that journey is truly the realization that we need to do something different. And that is to help build the bridge between whatever business strategy you have and how does that impact directly your commercial strategy and all the many enablers that you have as a commercial strategy. I've, in my own experience, certainly had loads of good and challenging discussions with sales executives on many different levels in the organization. And I think where we need to help each other out across functions is to realize that we don't all necessarily have the answers right away. That we need to lean into this exercise, and we need to be bold in exploring the unknown, but simultaneously also make sure that there are consequences. So at some point in time, any sales leader will need to take ownership of a transformation journey. The first part of that journey is to clearly being able to articulate what is it that we wish to achieve? What is the point of what we're doing? How does this benefit our customers? How does this benefit our bottom line? How does it change the way that we think and act in our everyday work? And if a sales executive does not strongly believe and become the role model in taking lead on this journey, then there's only so much you can do from a support function point of view. So I think there's lots of uncertainty, and the best way to at times deal with uncertainty is to lean into it and accept the fact that you don't have all the answers. And I think at times as leaders, we can be a bit afraid of actually involving and engaging our own organizations in helping us understand how we can help each other out in addressing some of those typical transformation or change management challenges that we face.
So help me with this, Sebastian. So to what extent do you actually see that because of this transformation, there's a lot of anxiety build up amongst, I'm going to only stick to sales professionals and sales executives, right?
Yes.
So have you observed that happen, that people suddenly feel, and the COVID is not helping either, right? So essentially things are already changing. COVID has made it faster. So what extent do you feel that anxiety and consequently well-being being affected amongst the sales professionals, and what does HR do to help with this?
Yeah, well, I think to your point, I think it has a huge impact, and I think there is lots of uncertainty. And there is lots of fear to some extent about what does the future hold, and do I still have a job tomorrow? And what are these new requirements? You know, how do I now operate in this new world in which I'm not able to sit down across my customer, which I've done for the past 15 years, and all of a sudden I have to do online meetings. So there is, I think, to your point, lots of anxiety in the sales organization, and I don't think that there's any simple solution, right? I think that in order to deal with anxiety, you need again to be able to articulate what is it that we want to do. What can we as an organization put in place to help our salespeople develop and also be able to give them the tools and the knowledge needed to act in this new world. Now, sometimes people will embrace this and hope. I believe strongly that in most of the cases, most of the time, people will lean into this and they will learn and they will develop. But there are also those instances where you need to force a bit of attrition in your sales. I think as a company, as a business, you owe it to your customers to ensure that you have the right capabilities at any point in time. So as part of this change journey, I think we also need to just be real about the fact that people will either voluntary or involuntary leave our business. And there will be some regretted leavers along the way, but there will also be times where it's perfectly okay to say goodbye to people who either don't have the capability nor the mindset needed to push forward.
Indeed. So one of the things I actually want to clarify with you is that attrition does not necessarily always mean that they have to leave the organization. They might have to leave the function. but maybe they're great team players. They can bring to kind of a different function within the organization, the knowledge. For example, they could move into procurement, for example, to try and see what they want to do if they've been good at it. So I think it's very interesting you talk about this. So that actually is a perfect segue into my next set of questions, which has got to do with how is HR facilitating sales transformations happening in companies. So if you could give us some examples from your own experience or from what you've observed. So tell us through some of the things that you've actually helped as HR professional helping your sales colleagues.
Yeah, happy to.
Yeah.
So I think we spoke about building the bridge between a business strategy and your commercial strategy, and what is it that you need to put in place in order to be able to deliver on your aspirations as a company. And there are many different factors that play into this. Some of them is around very straightforward. Do we have first and foremost, do we have the right structure? In order for us to be able to deliver, like you said yourself, you may have voluntary levers or involuntary levers that could actually do very well in another sales function. And I think sales overall has become, as we talked about, much more complicated, and you see much more specialist roles in sales now compared to what you did previously. So I think there's a piece around structure. Where we as a professional HR organization would need to play a vital part in helping both understand what is it that we aspire to do, but also what is the structure that we need to put in place. Then I think there is some very basic stuff around roles and responsibilities. So being quite clear about what are the different roles that we have within our business? How is it that they need to collaborate? What are the responsibilities and the capabilities needed in order for people to be a success in whatever roles we define? And obviously there needs to be some agility and flexibility in this. Things change quite quickly, especially in sales. I think sales is probably the single one function that has the highest amount of change happening.
Absolutely.
Different customer demands, new competitors coming into the market, new sales channels, different ways of thinking, different ways of working. Then there is something very, again, quite basic around the way we work. So what are the processes? What are the sales processes that we have? Absolutely. How do you define a price? How do you build an account plan? How do you follow up? What are the metrics that you as a sales manager or sales rep that you use in your day-to-day life in order for you to ensure that you are moving in the right direction? And there are incentive plans. So how do you incentivize your sales organization? How do you develop your sales organization? I think something like sales coaching is a truly fundamental thing, but I think the harsh reality is that in many businesses, whether they're big global businesses or small mid-sized businesses, I think sales coaching and actually developing sales reps or sales managers is something where we keep struggling.
Indeed. What about in a couple of things here as well? One of the things we hear a lot is this idea you said it earlier, we talked about war for talent, right? So to what extent does HR play a vital role in talent, bringing in talent and talent retention? Is that something that you see has seen a drastic improvement in how HR works together with sales, where in the past you would have HR bring in a set of candidates, then sales managers would take forever to make a decision, and then suddenly the candidates have gone. So essentially, have you seen improvements in the way that HR works much more closely with sales managers in deciding what kind of people you want to recruit? What are your sources? Or you know what I mean? Where are your pipelines coming in from, especially from a talent pipeline? So tell me a little bit more about that as well.
Yeah. I think that there is, with the risk of repeating myself, there is no right answer to this. I think you will find companies out there that are extremely proficient and extremely professional and strategic about building strong talent pipelines in sales and other functions. I think the reality is, though, that you have in many companies, recruitment is something of a bit of a transactional process still. and it's very much based on gut feel.
Yeah.
You know, do you find someone that you like? You talk about the cultural fit. You don't talk necessarily very much about diversity. You don't necessarily talk very much about the kind of skills that you may need in a new role, right? You have a tendency to copy paste whatever the previous guy or girl did. So I think there is a big challenge for us still, from an HR perspective, but certainly also from a sales perspective, to be much more strategic in how we think about talent acquisition. I think there are lots of great tools out there, right? You have lots of fantastic testing tools, different assessment centers that you can use in both assessing and bringing on board capable salespeople on all levels. I think to some extent, the harsh reality is also that in many companies still, these tools have a tendency to either just keep sitting in the drawer, or you use them, but it's more by exception rather than by rule. So I think there is as in many other functions, there is a bit of a challenge on the discipline and our disciplined approach to being strategic and thoughtful in how we both hire people, identify potential talent out there, hire people, onboard people. Onboarding is,
critical.
I think many businesses where we still struggle with putting in place strong onboarding programs. We have a tendency, I think, whether it's sales or even in HR, to say, well, we do a bit of an onboarding program, and sometimes the duration of that onboarding program is a month or 2 months, and we feed you with information about products and the way that you talk to customers. And this is, by the way, this is what your customer pipeline needs to look like. These are the metrics. Now go sell. We need to be much more mindful of what are the steps we need to go through in our onboarding process. And typically we have pretty good data telling us where do we have challenges along the way, right? When do people when do you see a drop in their performance? When do they typically leave the business? When do they typically become frustrated? Typically we know these things. And I think we need to be more mindful when we build, for instance, onboarding programs.
Let me ask you about something that I recently heard. And it's, again, as I said, just like you talked about how procurement can teach a lot of things to sales. I mean, procurement in your organization teaching sales. Tell me about this thing that I've heard a lot. I don't know if you've heard about it, at least in the academic space. There's this talk about job crafting. Mm-hmm. Have you heard the term job crafting being used by practitioners, by professionals like you? The idea is that you need to craft a job. So I've heard of job design.
Yes.
So I was just curious to see if you've heard of this. Again, as I said, I'm sorry for putting you on the spot, but I just thought since you're so knowledgeable and you're saying all the things that we hear, but apparently the topic right now is job crafting and how do you craft a job, which for me sounds a lot more in touch with the agility that you need in an organization. And so I was just curious to see, or what is when it comes to job design or redesign, what is the buzzword that HR professionals use to try and take a look at what kind of people and what kind of jobs they should be doing? So roles are typical words that we use, but like job design, I've heard about it, but have you heard of what is the buzzword, if any, that you use right now to help recognize what kind of people you want?
Yeah. I think it's a really good question, first and foremost. I think I honestly have very little experience with job crafting. It's been something that you, as you say, it's been a bit of a buzz, and I think where we typically struggle, if I can put that perspective on it, is that in order for job crafting to truly be impactful, you need as an organization to be willing to take the risk of saying we don't necessarily have something that is very clear cut in terms of what are the responsibilities, or what are the KPIs that we will apply, what are the key metrics that we will be looking for. But you need to lean into this and to a much larger degree accept the fact that you don't know the answer, but believe in that if we bring somebody on board, he or she will for sure find those levers that are important to pull in order to add value.
Indeed.
And I think it's very much almost a trust exercise more than anything else.
Indeed.
But my experience on this point is very, very limited.
Yeah, but it's fun. But for me, the fact is that I'm only hearing. In fact, I'm going to, based on what you said, I'm going to go ahead, and by the way, for the audience, this is the first time you're hearing it. So if anybody uses it, you heard it here first. I think we should be thinking even of job crafting alone is not enough. I think you should be thinking bigger. You should be looking at career crafting. So from the viewpoint of saying, when a person, of course, you talk about career paths, but the career paths again assumes based on the past, what has happened and how it will work moving forward. But career crafting is where you give the people the opportunity. This is my opinion. I do not, first of all, I should go look at what job crafting is myself. But if I were to build on what you said, you talk about levers and stuff like that. I think you should even think about career crafting if you want to keep people excited in their jobs once they come in. So I should have a good job that should be kind of give people the challenge, but you should also talk about how that job alone is not going to define them, how they can actually see a career within your organization. Yeah. And I would be really curious at some point in time to see if we go with job crafting, it's not that you just do it at one level. You have to do it at all levels within the organization, because what's going to happen is that you do not want to have job crafting for salespeople, but your sales managers do not know how to deal and coach the kind of people that you have. So I think it's going to be, job crafting is not something that you just do it at one level. It has to be something that has to be thought out in terms of what it means at different levels. And of course, if people cross, that's where the career crafting comes in. So that's, you heard it first here for the audience. So anyway, so I have one last question for you, Sebastian. This is in the interest of time, more than anything else. So if we talked about this, and this last question would be a long answer from you as well, is what are some of the common challenges that you face from an HR perspective? Because I've always looked at how sales managers have looked at HR saying, oh my God, here they come again with all the policies and all the kind of things. They are the ones with all the bureaucratic stuff and we need to do it. But of course, some people say, okay, I'm glad there's somebody doing the bureaucratic stuff, but the complaints are much more than the positive. So tell me about some of the challenges that you face from an HR perspective, even as you help sales organizations transform themselves.
Yeah. Well, firstly, I think that just well, it's not a simple thing, but business acumen is something that I think we struggle with continuously in both the HR space, but also across support functions. So trying to understand and grasp what is it actually that we do. And when we talk about, again, simple things such as setting a price, for instance, or measuring our gross margins, or building customer pipelines, what is it that we do? So there needs to be, I think one of the challenges we face as an HR profession is still understanding the nitty-gritty parts of how our business operate and where we then can add value. So that's I think one challenge. Yeah. I think a second challenge is just being allowed to partake in sales transformation processes. Yeah. And at times, you have to push down the door quite efficiently in order for you to be allowed to sit at the table and help drive these things. And I think we in this is business overall, we have to think about how do we invite one another into the hardcore machine room, because then that is where we can start adding some significant value. And then, of course, there is the traditional change management process is how to be able to create excitement, motivation, purpose of what it is that you're doing. And at times, we as HR professionals have a tendency to maybe be a bit narrow-minded also in terms of when building performance management processes, for instance. We have a tendency to be quite generic in our approach. And I think to some extent, HR professionals, where we have one of our single biggest challenges, is actually trying to be a little bit entrepreneurial in the way we think about HR and HR processes. because, well, the or the harsh reality is probably that most businesses have a talent process or specific performance management systems in place, or specific comp and ben policies, etc. But at times we do become quite generic in our approach on building the needed tools and processes for sales, for instance. So we need to allow ourselves to be a little bit, to think out of the box at times, embrace the multiple different types of solutions that we could put in place also.
Sebastian, thank you so much. I think we can talk for hours on what I think is very, very interesting. So, but in the interest of time, I would like to thank you again for taking time to talk to me and the audience as well. I think this is fascinating, getting the perspective from an HR professional, things that I should be doing much more in talking to other professions within the same organization, and how they can actually contribute to sales. And I think this is maybe a learning point for me as well, is that just talking to sales managers and sales executives gives a very nice perspective, but also talking across silos is going to also give us a different perspective. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you very much. It's been really interesting. Thank you.
Thanks. Stop recording.